What's going on, my money mavens and moolah misfits? It's me, Joe Knows Money. Thank you for joining today's live session. I'm just going to give everybody a few seconds to join the live feed, and then we'll kick things off in about 60 seconds. So again, welcome. Appreciate you joining. We're going to kick things off in about 60 seconds from now. So just hang tight. And remember, today's episode, we're going to cover how to maximize home equity. Right? How to maximize home equity, how you can build wealth from your home equity. And we'll talk not only about yourself building wealth from home equity, but also generational wealth, right? So we're going to cover a lot of great information today. Again, just want to give people a few more seconds to join. As always, please leave comments. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll be sure to address any questions that you have along the way. All right, just to be respectful of everyone's time, again, welcome back, my money mavens and moolah misfits. It's me, Joe Knows Money, that is, and we are kicking off today's live session, which is Ask Joe, right? And the Ask Joe segment came about because I get a lot of questions after the live discussions that I have, and I would very much like to answer every question individually. But I think where people will benefit even more greatly is if I'm able to answer a person's question in depth, but also have an audience watch me do it. So then they can gain some knowledge and information and ask their own questions around the subject matter, right? So this new segment is really centered around that. Whereas after I do a live video, I'll look in the comment sections, we'll pull out some questions that I think are universal. Questions that I've gotten in the past that I know I haven't gotten around to yet. And then we'll go live with that Joe Knows Money community member so that you can see what a session like that would normally look like in my financial advising days. And again, you can get the worthwhile information that we're trying to give. All right. So this whole discussion around home equity centers around the comment that Sparkle had, which is, as always, thanks for the great tips. Any suggestion on what, if anything, to do with home equity during this season, right? So that's a question that I've gotten before, and I got a lot of great information to share with you about home equity. But I was always taught to not leave your guests waiting, right? So without further ado, I want to make sure that I add in my special guest for tonight, Sparkle. So let me go ahead and add her in. Good evening, Sparkle. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Good evening.
Good. I appreciate you joining today and being the first guest on Ask Joe, right? So and we're actually having an Ask Joe tomorrow, and we'll probably have one next week. And I just found that this was a good way to answer questions, and like you and I had talked about in a conversation forum, because oftentimes when people ask the question, I'm left wondering a number of follow-up questions, kind of like a doctor, right? You're like, hey, my knee is hurting. I'm like, okay, cool. So how's your blood pressure? How's this? How's that? Because we're trying to narrow it down to see what is the exact prescription that's going to help you out, right? So again, appreciate you joining. One of the things I thought we could one of the ways I thought we could kick this off is by me just simply asking you, when you pose that question, what were you thinking about? Like what prompted that question in the first place?
One are all the continuous mailings that keep coming to my house now. I have an overflood of mailings that are saying you have equity, what do you want to do with it, pretty much is what they're asking. And I've entertained a few conversations around it. I have some ideas of some thoughts, if anything I do with it, but then also again during the season where it's just kind of on rocky foundation of what do you do financially. Don't make any major moves because we don't know what's happening next. So right. Do I sit safe, or do I capitalize on the opportunity of having the equity that I have?
Yeah. Great question. And I feel you on that, right? Little side note, one of the things, a little trick of the trade, and I might share it in the comment section, is there's a way to shut off all those mailings for 5 years that I learned about. Because, I'm traveling full time now. So I don't need my mailbox filling up with stuff that I won't use, right? But
Yeah.
nonetheless, sometimes it can prompt in your mind, like, yo, am I missing out on something? Right? Because like you said, I have this home equity. It seems like a lot of people are buying into it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be sending out these mailings. And is it right for me? Right. So I don't want to assume that everyone knows what home equity is, Sparkle. So first, I want to take a step back, just briefly talk about home equity, and then I'll dive precisely into the question that you have, right? So what is home equity, right? Home equity, simply put, is the difference between your home fair market value and your outstanding debt, right? So the example that I often use is that if we take a home that's valued at $300,000, assume that a person has a $100,000 mortgage left on that property, their equity is the difference, is that $200,000. So the question becomes, all right, well, I have this equity and it makes me feel good because it is an accomplishment, it's an achievement. And how you gain equity in your home is pretty much through two ways. One is going to be that you're paying down the original mortgage that you had, right? So that's going to add equity into things. But also your home is appreciating in value. Now, where are you at now, Sparkle? Where do you live full time?
I'm in Florida.
Okay, cool. So then over the last couple of years in Florida, like a lot of other places, that latter part, right, the increase in home value has given a lot of equity, right? So
Yes.
so now we're tackling equity on both ends. So naturally, what do you do with it? How do you unlock it? As I was thinking about a funny way in order to express this, Sparkle, I wanted to first share about a 20-second clip on how not to access home equity. All right. And then we'll dive into how someone can properly access home equity.
Okay.
Nothing here. Nothing in the walls. Nothing in the vent. I found a quarter and buttons.
Why?
There's money hiding somewhere in our house.
With Rocket Mortgage, we can use the equity in our home and turn it into cash.
So I can stop looking and we can finally consolidate our debt?
Yes, please stop. For a better way to find money.
So because people hear like, oh, I have home equity. What do I do? Like, what do people mean that I have this equity in my home, right? And it's what you and I just talked about, the difference between the fair market value of somebody's home as well as the debt that they owe. But then the question becomes, how do you access it? Well, there's pretty much three ways. One is the most unattractive way. So I go over the two that are most common, and then we'll talk about a third. But before we jump into that, if you haven't already, I just want to encourage everyone to please like and subscribe to the channel, because if you want other people to have access to information like we're going to share tonight, we need a like and a thumbs up so the YouTube algorithm can share this information far and wide, right? But without further ado, Sparkle, the first thing that can be done when we're talking about accessing home equity is a cash out refinance. Okay, so a cash out refinance, what a person is looking at doing is having a new mortgage on their property. So take that same $300,000 example that I gave earlier, the same $100,000 mortgage that a person still owes, but now what they're going to do is take out another mortgage to replace their existing mortgage. So let me put numbers to that. So $300,000 home, $100,000 existing mortgage, but now you take out a $240,000 mortgage. Part of that $240,000 mortgage is going to go to pay off that original $100,000 loan. So what's cashed out to you is a $140,000 difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Can I interject and ask a question there?
Yeah, please do.
So the mini mailings that come in, of course, it has like two different numbers on there. And I just want an understanding of that, where one of the numbers is like you have X amount of equity in your home, and you have another amount of cash value equity in your home.
Yeah.
So what are those two different numbers?
Yeah, so what happens is that a bank will only loan you, in most cases, up to 80% of the equity that you have in your home, right? So let me give an example. That's why I use the the $240,000 second mortgage, because if you take your home, if it's valued at $300,000, you should chop off 20% of that. So in this case, 300,000, subtract out 60,000, which is 20% equity. And what that leaves you is what you can actually get a loan for, because lenders require that you have skin in the game. They want to make sure that, you know, it's as painful for you to walk away from this property as it would be for them if they did walk away, if you did walk away from the property.
Okay.
Right. So that's why it's like, hey, you have $200,000 of equity in the example that I gave, but you can access a lesser amount because you have to keep that equity in the house.
Okay. And so the first one that you gave with the cash out refinance, that's the
Yep.
one that you said you advise against, that one, right? That wouldn't be your top choice, correct?
No, I haven't gotten to the third choice is the one that's least appetizing to most people. Right.
Okay.
But so I'm going to go over the two that are most popular, one of which is a cash out refinance. It's a little less popular today because interest rates are increasing, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. But that is one of the more popular ones that people have been using for a long time. And what makes it attractive, Sparkle, there's pros and cons to everything, but it has a fixed interest rate in most cases. So people look at it and they say, okay, great. Well, I can get this money cashed out to me. Yes, I will have to pay a little bit more per month in mortgage, potentially, because I went from a $100,000 mortgage to a $240,000 mortgage, right? However, either they'll pay more or they just will have a longer period of time to pay it off, right? Maybe that $100,000 mortgage was going to be paid off in the next 10 years, but now they're going to extend that $240,000 mortgage over 30 years so to equal out to the same monthly mortgage payment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what makes it attractive, is a fixed interest rate, and we're in a rising interest rate environment. So even if we have hyperinflation and we have interest rates for homes like they used to be in the 80s, as high as 17, 18%. Yeah,
Really?
it was that high in the 1980s.
Wow.
Right? So, but if you have your fixed interest rate mortgage locked in, you don't have to worry about that. The downside to this is that maybe you want to have access to your home equity, but you haven't figured out what you want to do with it yet. Right? It's like, I'm glad it's there, but I don't want to get this money cashed out to me when it may just sit there for years because I'm not sure what I want to do with it. So that brings us to our second option. So the second way in which you can access your home equity is a home equity line of credit, which is different than a loan, right? A credit is, just think of it like a credit card. You have a limit that's there if you need it, and you don't pay any interest until you use it. Just like a credit card.
Okay.
So the nice thing about the home equity line of credit is you can lock in this line. So let's say you're like, hey, you know what? Instead of getting $140,000 cashed out to me today, I just want to have access to $140,000 of my home equity whenever I need it. And I don't start paying interest on it or making payments until I actually tap into it. So in the definition of the home, equity line of credit is essentially where you're borrowing against available equity in your home, and your home is collateral, right? So the downside or the perceived, danger or con is the fact that it has a variable interest rate. So again, if we don't know, right? No one can predict the future, but if interest rates continue to go up, up, and up, and you're like, oh man, I took some money out on this home equity line of credit, I don't think I can pay it back for 5 or 10 years, then you have no control over the interest rate that you might pay over that period of time. Because
so that interest rate can change over time, regardless. Yes. So if I used it in this moment, the interest rate was one thing, and I used a portion of this line of credit,
Yeah.
that could then potentially increase over time for what I've already used or for future usage of that line of credit.
Yeah, for the outstanding amount, right?
Oh,
So
really?
whatever is outstanding. So let's say, for example, you take out a home equity line of credit, and they're like, hey, you know what? We're going to charge you 5% interest on this today, right? But let's say 2 years from now you tap it, maybe your new interest rate is 7%, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 9. Now some lenders have a cap where they can't increase it, let's say more than 2% a year or something of that nature. So that's something important for you to find out if this is an attractive option for you, is what kind of caps do they have in place so that you don't find yourself one day or 1 year paying 5% and the next year paying 12%, because all of that will make it, you know, a longer period of time before you can pay that money back.
Okay.
All right. So that's the perceived downside. So again, the upside is there if you need it. The other advantage, Sparkle, is that generally it costs less money to get a home equity line of credit established than it does to take out a cash out refinance loan. So a cash out refinance loan, you generally pay closing costs anywhere from 3 to 5%. With a home equity line of credit, I've seen it where, in most cases, put it this way, if you're paying more than $1,000 to establish a home equity line of credit, you pay too much, in my assessment. Because there's a lot of companies that what they will do, it costs them more to establish it, but what they'll say is, hey, as long as you keep this home equity line of credit open for 2 years, we'll only charge you this lesser amount, $500-$600 to establish it. Now, if you sell your home within 2 years or something of that nature, then they'll say, hey, you got to pay us $2,000 back instead of the $500.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So they use it as a way to attract people into it, because the more people have home equity line of credits available, the more likely they will be to use it and to pay the bank interest on money that they borrow.
Okay.
So I know I said a lot there, so let me just take a brief pause, see what questions that you have on what I share so far.
Just wanting the interest rate is the main thing right now. So like you said, with the first one, with the cash out, do I want to risk, and that's what, if I'm hearing it correctly, risk losing my current interest rate and fall into what some of the higher interest rates are right now for my whole mortgage, or just for what I cash out on?
Yeah, so it's essentially going to be for your whole mortgage, right? Because what you're doing is,
Because it's a new mortgage.
right, it's a new mortgage. So the new mortgage is higher than what you had before, right? If your original mortgage was $100,000, you cash out the max on the $300,000 home. Let's say it's $240,000. That $240,000 is what you owe to the bank. Now, where that $240,000 went, $100,000 of it went to pay off your original mortgage, and then the other $140,000 came to you.
Okay.
And you're just paying all of that back over time.
Okay. And so that's what I kind of assumed here. So with the refinance, I kind of understand that option. But again, it goes back into, say, like now my interest rate is like 2.5, and interest rates are going up and are almost at like 5% right now, which is seemingly high, just with the thoughts of it doubling from what it was versus, like you saying, in the 80s, it was a ridiculous, astounding amount. But then that would go into the thoughts of, okay, I'll fall into this new interest rate with a higher mortgage, potentially. So then that will owe more. So whatever I plan on doing, it better be worth the cost of it all.
Precisely, right? So when we get into how you can build wealth, we're going to talk about the opportunity cost of that money, right? It's like, to your point, it's like, all right, if I'm going to pay 5% for this money, to use this money to fund some other endeavor, it better be worth it. And B, funding that endeavor any other way should be more expensive, right? So I'll break that down to you in a second. But bingo, you're heading in the right direction. Okay. And then last but not least, right? This is the least favorite for most people. It's probably one of my favorite, right? I'm gonna tell you why, Sparkle. So selling your home, right? It's the least favorite for most people, right? The advantages is that you get all the money out of your property and you don't have to worry about paying back a larger amount and all of that stuff. Obviously, the disadvantage is you got to find a new place to stay.
Where am I
right?
going in this market?
In this market. So I'll tell you, if you listen to my other videos, which I know you have, and I appreciate it, I had a video, for example, like how to my whole theme of my channel is how to retire early. And oftentimes people will look at just their immediate surrounding and say, hey, I'm in Florida. I'm doing good by having this home because now I have to move into another home that will cost me this. And I may even get less square footage or less desirable neighborhood, less this, that, and third. However, let's say that you had a planned getaway where you say, you know what, I can get $100,000 equity off of my home, and I can move to Mexico and live off $20,000 a year, and I'm going to have a sabbatical for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and that can be funded just by this home. So we're looking at a comparable of living in Florida, but what about living in Mexico or Portugal or Costa Rica or these other places? Can it afford you an opportunity to be free from work? Right? So I just throw that out there for everyone to consider. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone has a different plan. But if you look at it from that standpoint, it could really provide some freedom, because right now, oftentimes people are working to pay for their home. But how nice would it be for your home to pay for something better for you? Right? Go ahead. I'm listening.
And that's pretty much where I'm at right now. Is I'm listening, because initially when you said it, I'm like, oh heck no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But I am in a crossroad with changing of chapters per se. Whereas literally I am empty nester right now. My daughter's going off to college. We've established residency in the state where she wanted to do college. So she'll be at FAMU. I don't expect her to ever want to return home. This kid, I might get a postcard once she's gone and done.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I have this whole house. What do I do with the 5-bedroom home? And it's just me. Yep. And I'm not here. I work away from home, so I'm often gone. So I'm often on the go. And I'm, of course, like, okay, well, I've scored a home in this market where I have to live somewhere. So I have a home that I'm not paying ridiculous amounts with or for. But what do I do with this? And so I've entertained thoughts of, do I look at gaining off of it? And that was some of the thoughts of, like, with the home equity, is I know I don't want to reinvest in the home. I'm not like doing any major renovations. That's not going to give me a good return on my investment. If people are waking up and selling their home as is and getting top dollar in this market, it wouldn't really benefit me to invest deeply in it. But yeah, before that one number 3, I would never, I've been like, oh no. But then I'm like,
Yeah, and think about it this way, right? Because what most people do is they ride their home value up and down, right? So it's like, because in the last 2 years, I mean, last year went up by over 20%, and then this year it's up by another 20%. What goes up will come down. So they just ride this roller coaster. It's like, my home used to be worth this. Now it's worth this. And it's like, how did you benefit from it being worth more other than your taxes going up? Right? And instead, if you look at it more of a 360 standpoint, you can, to your point, you can say, hey, well, I know rents are increasing. It's now a good time to rent it out and let someone else, can I rent it out for $3,000 a month? And, my mortgage is $1,500, and then my apartment in Costa Rica is another $1,500. So they're paying for me to be somewhere else. Or do you want to sell and say, you know what, the dollar right now, and this is what a lot of people don't know because they're just thinking in the United States, the dollar is at a historically strong level, which means that when you go to different places, the dollar as compared to the peso, as compared to the euro, as compared to the euro, for example, has always been more valuable than the US dollar for the most part. But now it's almost on par. So now you can get a house for about 15% cheaper just by the currency difference in Europe than you ever could, right? Or if you go to Mexico, if you go to Costa Rica, if you go to Indonesia, you go to all these places, the dollar is super strong. And you're not going to find yourself in this situation in a long time where your house is at peak value and the dollar is at peak strength. So I'm not saying people should do it, but I just want them to know that they have an opportunity to do it if they choose to be, if they choose to go that route. I'm happy for them. If they don't, at least they knew, and that's my job to make people aware of it. Or at least I feel like that's my calling. Right.
Okay.
All right, good deal. So great conversation on that. But what you want to know is how to use your home equity to grow your wealth or further your position or situation, right? The nice thing about your home equity, it allows you to be your own bank. So the thing you know about this, Sparkle, if you ever, well, obviously, when you take out a mortgage, they want a lot of information and they almost want your firstborn, right? And then if you ever take out a business loan, they want your secondborn, your thirdborn, your futureborn, and everything else in between just to lend you some money, right? So this really allows you to be your own bank, and that's an advantage. The disadvantage is it allows you to be your own bank, right? Are you going to scrutinize your purchases, your investments as much as a lender would, right? So you have to be super disciplined with money and just not invest in an underwater basket weaving company or, whatever else because you have the money available, right? So what can you do with this money? So this goes to the heart of your question, Sparkle. So first and foremost, a person can pay off higher interest rate debt with their home equity. So this is what we were talking about before. If you look at it, you're like, ooh, Joe, I'm paying 2 now, and why would I pay 5, right? It only makes sense in certain situations. And one of those situations may be if you're paying a credit card debt that's 18 or 19% interest. If you're, paying some other debt that is more expensive than the refinance amount that you can get. And that may not apply to you, but as you can imagine, a lot of people are taking on more debt, particularly with the rising, inflation number, right? It's costing more to just tread water, right? So paying off higher debt. And by the way, Sparkle, I always tell people, think about your family members and friends, right? Because one thing I know about you, you've always had a heart for the community, right? So part of that, oftentimes people will hit folks up for money like nonstop, right? And so my thing to people is like, yo, stop giving people money and give them the information they need, right? Like, don't come to me, for $50 extra. Here's a cell phone plan that will work out to be $50 less per month. Don't come to me for this. Here's what you can do in order to further your situation on that, right? So always think when I'm sharing this information, like, who needs to hear this? So if we look here, second, emergency fund. And that's not a typo, by the way, right? What do I mean by that? I advocate, like most, to keep an emergency fund of 6 to 12 months. That's ready cash in the bank, in a money market, in a savings, in a CD, hopefully not checking, but if so, great, right? To make sure that if you hit a rough patch, because what you're alluding to in your original question is in this season, meaning, hey, it's volatile out there. We're not sure what's going to happen with inflation, gas prices, grocery prices, the housing market, jobs, all of that. We're on the brink of some really serious financial stuff. So you want to make sure that you have an anchor that can keep you from floating backwards from the progress that you've made in your financial life. But sometimes things will come up that are just outside of what you planned for, right? It's like, yo, I have 12 months saved, but I didn't plan for my roof to go out at the same time that my air conditioner went out. Now I'm looking at, $25,000, and that's more than my emergency fund. Well, if you have a home equity line of credit, you can tap into that versus putting that extra expense on like a credit card. You can tap into your home equity line of credit to be your safety net. The other way to utilize the money is going to be to seed, to act as your seed money for a business. So here's the dilemma for a lot of people. And I look, I mean, it should go without saying nowadays, but people need to understand that I'm not going to say little has changed, but a lot of things are still the same when it comes to lenders and lenders wanting to give money, particularly to people of color, right? I mean, you can still read articles about various companies that are discriminating against people who are trying to get a mortgage, trying to get a business loan. Hell, even the PPP loan, right? Or the PPP, loan during the pandemic. So by you being able to be your own bank and being able to fund your own business idea is an amazing position to be in, right? And the thing to think about is this: even if they're not discriminating against you, oftentimes it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Do you have any restaurant, owner experience? No. Well, then you can't get a loan, right? But it's like, well, how can I get said experience of owning a restaurant if I don't get the loan, right? And oftentimes that's what happens, is that you may have some of what they need, but not all of what they need in order for a lender to feel comfortable, and you can fund a business this way. All right. The other thing that people don't think about when they're just reading stuff, and they're like, oh, wow, UPS store will cost me $300,000 to open. I don't have $300,000. They just move on with their daily life. Not even thinking like, how can I cobble this together to really get out of my 9 to 5 and, take a different route of being my own boss. And again, it can be a combination of your savings, your equity, and what have you can really fund these business ideas.
Okay.
One of my personal favorites. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. After you. You had a question?
No, I was basically saying what you're about to state on here, that those were my options, were a business or reinvesting in another property. But it looks like you're about to talk to that now.
1,000%. So this is one of my favorites, right? Because you can buy an investment property. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, if you buy an investment property with this money, you better make sure that it cash flows. Because again, you're going to have a potentially higher mortgage now that you've taken on more debt, or you're going to have a mortgage for a longer period of time. And you don't want to add on top of that a mortgage of another investment property, right? So you want to make sure that you're going to have enough buffer between what you're paying out in the mortgage and what you can get for rent on that property, okay? Now, the nice thing is this, though. Sometimes lenders will look and say, based upon your income or whatever the case might be, we don't see you having the ability to fund 2 properties at one time. However, if you have your own home equity line of credit or you cashed out refinance, then they can't tell you what to do with your money. So then you don't have to go to them. You can just buy your own property and you can refinance it later. Right? Another thing that people will do, and this is like a hybrid here, where they will buy a vacation property. Now, maybe a vacation property just for them and their family, but it also may be a vacation property that they're looking at as an investment to rent out when they're not, using it themselves. So that's another great way. And cash is king. That's the other thing, Sparkle. So when you get a mortgage for a loan, that's one of the toughest things that people are finding in this current housing market, whether it be a primary home, investment property. These big companies are coming to the table buying up homes with cash. Cash is far more attractive to a potential seller than someone who has to get a mortgage, because if you have to get a mortgage, that always has the potential of falling through. So they want the sure bet. So cash is king. And by you being able to write the check out of your home equity line of credit, or you have this money in the bank from the from the cash out refinance, you don't have that problem. And then last but not least, it allows you to bridge to the next primary home. So even if you're going from one home to a next, again, a lender may not give you that loan for the second property, or they may not give it to you at a favorable rate. They say, oh, you're probably going to use that as an investment property or whatever the case might be. And you're like, no, it's going to be my primary home. Sometimes they'll make it difficult and say, well, you have to get a buyer in place first before we will give you a loan as if it's going to be your primary property. So if you can use your home equity to pay for all or a large portion of that loan on the next home, then you'll be in good shape. All right, so I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Let me just take a second. I'm passionate about this stuff, so I just want to make sure it's connecting though, right? What questions do you have on this?
So the one question, just backing up the ideal of that sell the home option. Sell the home and you have the equity now that initial loan is paid off. Now you have that lump sum of what your equity difference is. How then is that affected tax-wise? And how do you get not having it eaten up by taxes then?
Oh, great question. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I didn't put one of those slides in about taxes, because that's one of the best benefits when it comes to your primary home, is that the first $250,000 of equity that you have, and I don't give tax advice, but this is information that you can easily find, is that the first $250,000 of gain is not taxed.
Really?
And that's for a single person, and for a married person is $500,000. Right.
Okay.
So yeah, all of that money, can be put to some really good use, because it won't be eaten up by taxes.
Okay. And so then looking at, or even the thought of entertaining that option right now, having that, and then is that at all, can anybody tell me what to do with it? Like, is it so, like, being outside of being my own bank, like, can I then, if I decide to take that equity out and sell the home and use what the difference is from that initial loan to fund a business or to buy investment property? Because the ideal of the business, I don't know if it's sharing or saying too much, would be to do like an investment home or and or Turo. So having vehicle and home so that it can continue to regenerate the income would be the thoughts right now. Can someone tell me you can use that for this, but not for this per se, or is it my money?
It's your money, right? That's the beauty. That's why you're the bank, right? You can decide what to do with that money and weigh it out to see, all right, is it more beneficial for me to go the traditional route of getting a loan here, or using my cash at this percentage in order to fund this business idea, right? And then the other cool thing is, as people travel, they may fall in love with some places, and they may say, man, I would really like to have a home here or there. And what a lot of people don't realize too, Sparkle, is that just because you can get a loan in the United States for a home, a lot of places around the world do not work that way. Either you have to pay cash for a property, or it's so not in your best interest to get a loan that no one in their right mind would tell you to, right? Because again, I'm in Mexico right now, right? If you look at getting a loan in Mexico, you might as well look at, the interest rates from the 1980s in the United States. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. But if you have equity in your home, you can take advantage of buying a home here. The other cool thing about it is, remember, if we look at it more globally, you may say, wow, home values are really high right now in the United States, but they're really low in a country that I like. So why don't I take some of this to buy some of, you're essentially selling high, buying low, right? So I'm encouraging people to look at things from a 360 standpoint.
And that's, I was just in Mexico a couple weeks back,
Yep.
And that was the discussion I had, was the idea that it's not the same. So a guy that was there, he was saying that pretty much you cash only when you're purchasing a home there, because to the way we traditionally do it in the States is not the same over there. And so that was the thought I had to entertain, was like, oh, we get comfortable with the ideal of a mortgage and having lenders. And that's not
because
the
people,
case.
no, because people think, they're like, oh, I can afford a $300,000 home. I can afford it. It's like, you can in the United States, right? But unless you got 300,000 in cash in Mexico or any of the number of other places I mentioned, it's like, nah, you won't be getting that $300,000 home. So just planning accordingly. The nice thing is you won't even need 300,000 in some of these places to have just as nice of a home. Just saying, right? Oh, the other thing I want to mention before I forget though, Sparkle, is the other potential downside to a home equity line of credit is that if housing markets do decline dramatically, then banks have and they will decrease your credit line, right? In 2008, they were canceling people equity lines and, all of that kind of stuff, where people thought they had a safety net, an additional emergency fund, and they didn't have it because they hadn't utilized it yet, right? If you're using it, it makes it a lot harder for them to pull one of those tricks on you, right? But if it's just sitting there and you haven't utilized it, they can pull it back.
Okay.
All right, so check this out. I gave you about 4 traditional ways in which people use it. Are you ready for some creative, non-traditional ways in which people utilize home equity line of credits? And all right, buckle up. All right, so check it out. What some people will do, I ain't saying people should do it, but I'm going to tell you where it makes sense. So some people will take that money and invest it in the stock market. Most times that's a horrible idea, right? Because oftentimes they're not doing it smart. It's, they're probably thinking like, man, Rihanna's about, her lingerie line is about to go public. I need to put all my money into that. But just because it's a good product or whatever the case might be, doesn't mean it's a good investment for you to put your money into. Or whatever number of, stock ideas a person may get for one reason or another, right? That was an article that I just read, right? But when you think about investing in the stock market, some people do, look at it and say, hey, like right now, the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies, right, represented in that index, is down by 20%. The NASDAQ, which is a lot of our tech companies, that's hundreds of different tech companies in that indice, is down by more than 30%. So people may look at that and say, I'm going to take some of this money and put it into that, or all of the money, because I know historically, and history is no predictor of the future, that I have made money. It may be a great idea, it may be a horrible idea, but one scenario which it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people is if people are using a margin account. Are you familiar with a margin account at all?
Not at all.
So a lot of people are familiar with like brokerage accounts, particularly like Robinhood and Webull and some of these new ones that have come along. And what people will do is if they have $10,000 in there, they will take a loan for another $5,000. So they use their $10,000 as collateral to get another $5,000 loan to buy more of the stock that they want, or more of the crypto that they want, or whatever the case might be. The problem is, let's say they did that with Amazon stock. They had 10,000 Amazon stock. They took 5,000 loan to buy more Amazon stock. Well, so far, Amazon is down by more than 40%. So now the lender will come to them and say, hey, you got to pony up some more money for us to feel comfortable that you have enough collateral. Where you get that money from, I don't care. But guess what? If you don't give me that money, I'm going to sell all of your investments at a 40% loss in order to get my money.
Oh.
So is that a better option? Or if you are going to play the stock market, and that's not what people should do. But if you're going to do that, then would it not make sense to have a home equity line of credit or a cash out refinance scenario where you get to pay this money back over 10, 20, or 30 years. And historically, the stock market has never had a 20-year period of time that you didn't make money. So it may be worth it for some people. So I want to put all the options on the table so people can't say, I didn't know that, Joe. What are the pros? What are the cons? The other one, which is my favorite, I'm biased, Sparkle. I'm biased. I admit it, is the fund your sabbatical. All right, so let me pose this to you, okay? Because I know when we talked about the original one, you're like, hit me in my neck. All right, so when was the last time you had, as an adult, a 12-month period of time that was purely dedicated to you? Not taking care of family member, not taking care of your health, or I'm talking about you are in good health and you take 12 months to travel the world, write a book, sit on your front porch and watch other people go to work for a change. When was the last time, or have you ever done that in your adult life?
Not a 12-month period, no. I take sabbaticals,
So,
those quarterly, but not for 12 months straight.
So here's the importance of that, in my opinion, right? Keep in mind, my opinion is not only my personal experience of traveling the world and experiencing myself, but also having been a financial planner for over 20 years and having a front row seat to thousands and thousands of clients in how they approach retirement. And my philosophy is this: most people have a hard time saving for retirement because we ask for them to take a gigantic leap. Put away money for something that won't arrive for 40 years. You have no idea what it looks and feels like because you never had that period in your adult life to test drive this theory. So therefore, most people focus on today. Hey, I know what's in front of me today. I don't know what's going to happen 40 years from now. But if you take a 12-month sabbatical, you get to feel what retirement looks and feels like. So even if you decide you want to go back to work afterwards, that's your prerogative. You know, some people say, Joe, I worked hard for these designations, certifications. I'm at the top of my game financially right now. Now's not the time for me to walk away. Great. At least you know what you're striving for, because you literally can point to it as something that you've already done. And then some people will figure out, yo, this ain't for me. So maybe I'm motoring towards the wrong thing. Maybe I need to just find a career that I can do forever because I'm going to be bored out of my mind if I don't. Different strokes for different folks. But my point is, you can fund a sabbatical with this money. All right. Here's one thing that I think isn't up for debate, Sparkle, right? Is that I share with you the pros and cons. But I think one of the things that everyone should walk away with is knowing that not owning a home is not an option. Because what I just gave to everybody is half a dozen options, some of which people may, just like you're like, Joe, I don't know about this. Ooh, that sounds good. That's cool. But I want people to have options, and none of these options will be available if a person is renting. Right? And this goes back to the whole larger notion of when we talk about the wealth gap between Black and white, the primary reason why it exists is because of the gap in home ownership. Most people's wealth is in their home. It's not in stocks, it's not in businesses, it's in none of those things. It's in their home. So if you don't own a home, you're going to find yourself with a very small net worth, chances are. There's exceptions to every rule, but we're talking about the rule. Is people are not going to have very high net worths, and they sure the hell aren't going to have the options that I just mentioned, to take a sabbatical, to invest in a business, to buy an investment property, to do any number of things. And I haven't even talked about the things like paying for the kids to go to college if they don't have the money anywhere else to do so, right? And the list goes on and on and on and on. So that part, I think people should take away as something that's not in debate is you either own the property to live in or you own the property to invest in, but not owning property is not an option.
Okay.
All right. So yeah.
Okay.
Questions. I got one more thing I'm going to share with you is where you go to get a home equity loan, right? But before I dive into that, any questions about what we talked about so far?
Nope. I think I've been asking what was left out, and that it was a thought that I had, but it wasn't generated as a question before. Because again, my thought was we've always been told that the ideal thing to do is to purchase home, and then I'm like, well, if I sell my home, then I don't have. But you've kind of reiterated and explained that where that's that that necessary piece is to have that wealth there. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the question becomes if you go any of these routes, like you said, hey, Joe, I get these mailers in the mail all the time. You know, I even showed you a clip, was that Rocket Mortgage or whatever the case might be. You know, at the end of the day, there's two places that I suggest people go and look to do some comparison shopping. One is bankrate.com. So on bankrate.com, you can look and see what are the prevailing interest rates, so you can get a sense for that. But the thing I would tell people as you're comparison shopping, I would suggest that whatever interest rate that you're looking at, request that it involves 0 points. And not to overcomplicate it, a point just means that you pay extra money up front to have a lower interest rate long term. But what happens, that makes for uneven assessments, because if one of your quotes assumes that you paid $3,000 up front to get a lower interest rate, and another is a slightly higher interest rate, but you don't pay $3,000 up front, which is the better choice? It's hard to determine. But if neither one of them have you putting more money up front in order to get a lower interest rate, which means 0 points, then you can do a side-by-side comparison to see who is truly charging you more.
Okay.
The other place, and my favorite, is credit unions, right? Because your local credit union, sometimes people are like, I mean, there's postal credit unions, there's all kind of credit unions. People are like, well, I don't work for the post office. You don't have to. You pay $5, open up an account, and now you're a member of the postal whatever credit union. You just want to look at who has the best rates overall, right? You don't care about anything else, right? Who has the slickest sales piece, who has, what best commercials like I showed, is who has the best interest rates, because that's going to save you the money. All right.
Okay.
All right, so we made it, Sparkle. We here, right? We went through all the things that I could think of in order to determine whether or not you should tap into your home equity line of credit or cash out refinance or just sit tight or sell your home, right? Now you know all the available options, right? What are you gonna do? No, I'm just playing. Like, so on the spot, what are you gonna do this weekend? Right. No, in all seriousness, anything that we haven't covered that you feel like it would be helpful for us to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered a lot. I've gotten the information that and more than what I intended on having. So I do like this format. This definitely helped a lot versus me just taking notes from your lives. So I appreciate you taking the time to do it this way. I was a little skeptical on, oh no, I got to be on live somewhere. Right. But no, I appreciate that. Cool. It gives me some information to make an educated decision as opposed to just kind of throwing it out there and see what happens. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you and thank you for being my first guest. And And I'm glad that we were able to overcome those fears and make sure you have a good experience. So I appreciate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask that anybody have Q&As. Let's just put, instead of having a Q&A right now, because we went kind of long, please, if you have any questions, put it in the comment section. And then that way, similar to what Sparkle did, if it's a question that I think multiple people can benefit from, or I've heard it before, I'll be sure to address that on one of these Ask Joe live sessions. So again, thank you, Sparkle. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, y'all. And as always, I appreciate you joining. And if you have any questions, like I said, leave them in the comment section. Please like and subscribe so that the YouTube algorithm can share this information far and wide. And until next time, be good to yourselves.